Welcome to Mastering Sales and Negotiations, the podcast for ambitious professionals who want to sharpen their skills, transform their conversations, and deliver lasting commercial impact. In today's episode, we're joined by Martin Cousins, founder and CEO of Insights Media and a leading voice in learning in HR. Martin has spent over 25 years helping organisations turn research and customer insights into actionable strategies that drive growth, retention and innovation. We'll explore the art of listening as a strategic advantage, why creating time and space for meaningful conversations with customers and stakeholders can unlock opportunities far beyond the transactional, and where to start if you want to build a listening culture in your own organisation. So whether you're in sales, marketing or customer success, this conversation offers practical strategies and a fresh perspective on how listening and insight can become your most powerful tools for growth. Let's get started. Martin, welcome to the Mastering Sales and Negotiation podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You've spent, I think, 17 years in B2B publishing and then you built Insights Media. So just tell us a bit about your journey and what led you to specialise in customer listening and insight.
Well, thanks for having me both. It's lovely to be here and talking about, what I think is my favourite thing, but also it's a really important thing. So it's not just a work thing either. So the journey was, if you were to give someone advice about, your ideal career, of course, mine wouldn't be following any rules at all. Because I just came out of university and there was a job in the job centre that said local publishing company. So I went there and I just looked around and I was like, oh, this is interesting. What's that job? And what's that? And basically it was a large publishing company. So it had a couple of thousand employees in the building, loads of media brands. And I really started at the bottom and just actually got a real taste for publishing, journalism, and everything that represented, actually, which for me was, kind of finding stories. It was all about facts. It was about stories. It was about understanding your audience and what they needed from you. And, that has always been kind of something that I'm kind of feel quite passionate about, really. And within that, it's the listening bit, which we will come on to. So I did that for, I basically went from the bottom to reasonably high up in that organisation, managed quite big teams. It was always on the editorial side. So I'd done pretty much every job that you could do on the editorial side, up to editor role, sort of managing editor type stuff. And then basically I ended up leaving and went freelance and then basically built a business that's, basically, I was doing a lot of stuff in the publishing space in and around HR and learning. And I think there's a tenuous link here, but I always wanted to be a teacher. And my mum was a teacher. A lot of my extended family were teachers. And I think actually, I really just think it's a great thing to be able to want to help people develop themselves, actually,
sure.
and achieve whatever they want to achieve. So that was a thread in all of this, which meant that I quite enjoyed the learning stuff, actually. And when I was in the corporate, I did a lot of peer learning activity. I just did it off my own back and it was quite successful. So actually there is a sort of strand of learning in all of this, which is quite important. So that took me more into the HR learning sphere, and we carried on our kind of journalism and communications work, but that has morphed into research and customer listening, because we've kind of always been looking at what the most valuable thing is in the work that we do. And also now we're thinking about what is the most valuable in terms of people paying us when AI can do it for you.
Yeah.
And I mean, you may or may not agree, but for me, there's still something in being able to ask questions directly to someone face to face.
Absolutely. And
pick up on everything that they're talking about and be able to sort of progress a conversation that has a lot of value in it. So that's how we've managed to get to where we've got to with the business, because we've kind of distilled some of the stuff out along the way. I mean, we still do a lot of comms work and, this is all wrapped up actually, but what comes out of customer listening is all the stuff that can help you with your brand and your service and your product. And so I think it's the heart of it all. And that's why we've ended up focusing on that, if that makes sense.
And as a kind of an external, I mean, you talk about and have talked about this idea of intentional customer listening, this idea of having a real purpose behind it. What is it about organizations' relationship with their customers that you think is enhanced by having somebody from outside coming in and really helping them frame that and have that, I guess, a more objective viewpoint? How does that add value to the interactions that we all have with our customers every day? We think we know our customers pretty well, and we hope they know us pretty well. But you add something extra. Where do you think that comes from?
That's a great question, and I think it comes from the fact that, from a journalistic perspective, I've always marveled at what people will tell you when you ask them some questions, right? And what happens in organizations is that everyone has a defined role and defined targets and tasks. And they tend to have a defined version of what a relationship looks like with their customer.
Yeah.
So they build functions and functional silos around what that looks like, right? So, if you're a SaaS company, you'll have customer success was very much built out of being able to, upgrade the value of your customer contracts. So, and there's method around that. So it's all very well defined. And actually within that, you then build relationships based on the dynamic and the questioning that you might have and the process that you might have, which might involve fairly regular check-ins, asking certain questions. And a lot of that will be focused on the value of the contract. Yeah. Because you just want that person to be really happy with what you're providing. And that's completely legitimate, good, and valuable. However, what about other questions you might like to ask that might either be more challenging or take you somewhere else, where it takes you out of that dynamic and the understanding of what a kind of normal everyday conversation would be with that client? How do you pitch that? And when do you have those conversations? Yeah. And what's the value there? And I think that's where you can, as an independent, you can come in and you can do that more easily for your clients. So and also I think there's another thing about this, which is this idea of independence. So
absolutely.
I had a client who actually did do the customer listening that we were doing with them, but they took the questions and they went and did it with 5 or 6 of their clients for themselves. So the actual answer to your question, based on what he found out, was that those people, that those conversations ended up being about the relationship, the day-to-day relationship. It would fall into work conversation, and it wouldn't be as easy for him to talk to his clients about the questions that we were asking, which I thought was quite interesting. Because actually you've got a history, you know each other, you're comfortable with each other potentially, or you might not be comfortable with each other, but you've definitely got a relationship. And I don't have that when I come in. I'm there in service of the questions to get the answers, whereas most people are in service of the relationship, asking questions and getting answers, but it's all about maintaining the relationship. And I think that's nuanced, but I think it's quite an important nuance. It means that I can probably I do get different types of answers because it's outside of all of those kind of norms in the relationship.
Sure. And I think there's a thing which strikes me about that, which is around the asking the questions yourself, which is, first of all, if I get you right, there's that idea that essentially it is subsumed beneath the value of the transaction to a certain extent. It soon gets into a kind of back and forth, which is about protecting the relationship, but it's also about working out where the next commercially valuable move might be. Whereas this is more disinterested in that side of things to a certain extent. I wonder also, Martin, what role something like confirmation bias plays within this, because I see people ask a lot of questions where what they listen to is the answers which confirm what they already think, rather than perhaps more uncomfortable truths or things which people are more open-minded about. Do you believe that there's the independent, objective role that you play for those clients also kind of overcome some of that issue, and why is that important, I suppose?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, we're all human, and it's all relational, this work. So it really matters how you relate to other people, how you relate to your customers. Yeah. So I think, you know, it's quite a big ask to start dropping in really challenging questions, potentially out of context.
Yeah.
Because it might upset the relationship and the expectations on both sides. So I think you're right. I think it's a lot easier, for example, and I'm not saying it's done because it's easy, but it's a lot easier to frame questions that will give you just what you just said.
Yeah.
It will give you what you want. It'll make you feel great. And the other person might feel that they've helped make you feel great. And the answer might make them feel great too. And they're all very happy. But actually, we didn't find out a full lot at that point. Yeah. And actually, next week, I'm going to end this contract, but you don't know that yet. That can be, that is real. You know, we can carry on and things come to an end. You might have some signals suggest that it's going to happen, but sometimes people can be genuinely quite surprised and shocked that what they thought was a good relationship wasn't quite as good as it was.
Yeah. Or wasn't unassailable anyway. There was, there are other things going on.
And can I just say also, I think everyone is really busy a lot of the time, right? And I think this is a factor in all of this. It's not just things like confirmation bias. It's actually trying to carve out the time to have a different type of conversation is actually really important. And if you can do that, then you really need to make it valuable. Yeah. And that feeds into things like asking really good questions and listening properly. Because if you're going to invite people to spend more time with you, in this kind of context, having these kind of conversations, then you're going to have to make it worth their while. And they really do need to be heard and feel like something's going to change. So I think that's important.
One of the points I was going to make as well that happened when, we've done this exercise with you guys, and we got some great feedback from it. But one of the things I found really interesting was that some of the interviews that you did, some of the questions that you asked, they revealed almost a bit of sort of the emotional journey behind some of the decisions that people had made rather than just the rational ones, which I think if we'd gone in and asked those questions, we would have just got the rational answers. Whereas there was obviously some space for them to answer a little bit differently with you. And we think we really benefited from that.
There's a lot riding on these kind of relationships. Yeah. I mean, if you're holding big contracts, and actually what determines the success or otherwise of that contract isn't just the service provision or the product. A lot of our work has established the fact that the relationship really, really matters. It's so important. So I think that's, that comes back to that point. I think it's, it's how do you have a space where you can let someone be a bit more honest about that relationship, in a constructive way. And I think, and it's interesting because that sort of thing does start to happen. You do get a much richer picture of, you know, what that relationship looks like from from my perspective. You know,
Absolutely.
all I'm doing is encouraging someone to say what they think in a safe environment. It's all teed up properly. They know that, you know, you're going to hear the answers, you know, so it's not like we're pretending that you're not going to hear them. That's only for my ears, or it's only for them. It's actually all very transparent, but within that, people will open up more. It's interesting. I don't know the answer,
but I think there was a level of honesty with the responses that you got from the people you spoke to on our part, which I thought was a very interesting, but also very valuable. More to the point, and I think the idea of being honest, even though there is clarity about where this information is going, and that it will be fed back to us as the supplier in that case, and we've got to, you know, still have a conversation with them the following week or whatever, and so there was no artifice about that. It was not as if any confidences had been broken, but I guess in the way that questioning technique, and you talked about your journalistic background and uncovering the stories, and I want to dive into that a little bit, really, to say to what extent does that training, your experience, your background of not just listening carefully and constructing the story that you hear, but also getting people to open up, to tell you those stories. How does that work from developing a conversation with someone where, you could just go in and say, here's 10 questions, I'm going to ask these 10 questions, but you don't. You go in and you adapt and you develop. Where does that come from, and how is that sculpted so that you get the best from it, I guess, which is a very difficult and complex conversation to have, I guess, but how does it happen?
I think if your experience is one of people not necessarily wanting to talk to you, or be slightly skeptical about, as a journalist, they were always the least trusted people on earth, weren't they? Along with, estate agents, it used to be something like that. So just remember that it's like, actually, trust is a massive part of this. But so how do you? What I think is quite interesting, there are different elements to this, and one of those elements is the fact that you're teeing this all up, right? That is really important. We're not doorstepping your customer and just out of the blue saying, here we come. I need 5 minutes of your time. I'm going to ask you some really awkward questions. It's not that, right? It is the context matters. So, you have asked them. There is a reason why you're asking them. We have agreed the questions, right?
We spent a lot of time trying to get those. That was a very big point of the whole exercise, wasn't it? We spent a long time trying to get those questions right and to be really honest, so we could be really honest with those questions. It's a key factor, isn't it, of the whole project?
Yeah. And I think, so there is this element of, knowing what you're being asked to do from the interviewee perspective, right? So, the context. You've seen some questions, which I think is useful because it does really help people think about what's coming. So there, because people do, I think there's a couple of things here, which are also, it's also important about the how good the answers are, is that if you know the limitations or the guardrails, if you like, around the interview and how the information is going to be used, then that can really help people open up or not. So if you're talking to large corporate organizations, then the cold hand of corporate communications is on that person always, right? So they might not feel that they can be open. But actually, if you do set these up correctly, then they probably will be far more open than they would to a journalist, for example. Obviously, because that information can become public. So you've got this kind of guardrails around it. You've got the questions, but then you've got the interview, right? So, and I think that's what is really important about that is that I think it's important that you feel credible somehow, right? So one thing we offer is we do this across kind of, learning and talent, HR, and it's a field that we know, right? So if someone starts using jargon what I can do is I can start a conversation, which is, you kind of go in easy, just a bit about, the hellos and all, but also a bit about your role and, the organisation. Talk a bit about the challenges that they're facing, because I know what sort of challenges they're facing. And these are small signals that are trying to just say, I've got a good sense of, what's going on for you. Because if and I'm looking at people as well, I am not staring at a list of questions going, right, here we go. What about this? And I just look at the top of my head. And I'm
Number
thinking,
2.
It's not that.
Yeah.
It's like open, all the questions that we ask are open, right? And also, there has to be some scope for someone saying, I don't understand that question, or, we've got to be really clear. I've had a lot of clarity around the questions, I think. And then, so you're asking, but then you have to know how to stop yourself as the interviewer. I think, it's this idea of, hey, it's not about me.
Yeah.
I'm just a tool here, not in that sense. in the sense of I'm here to get good answers, right? That's my job, right? And it's and that whole idea around the cult of the interviewer, from a journalism perspective or an influencer perspective, it's not that, right? It's absolutely about the person you're talking to, because that's what everyone cares about the most. So, and I think you can feel that. I think it's like, and you do that in a number of ways. And one of those ways is to know when to stop asking the question and when to listen, and then how far you're going to go listening. Because I think, and now we're going a bit granular, but you asked, so I'm going to go a little bit granular.
Yeah. It's
things like pauses, for example.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Do you not, everyone does this because there's a discomfort around a pause. And, we've got to jump into that space because there's no sound. And it's like, oh, awkward. Well, it's not awkward, because if you wait a little bit longer, what tends to happen is that people people think in waves. So it's like something is coming, right? And you don't have to fill that space. And what's really interesting is what comes next. And I think, as an interviewer, you've got to hold your nerve a bit and just ask a question and see what happens. But then you might not get very far with a question. So you have to ask the question in a different way, because you're asking me to get an answer for a question.
Yeah.
And then you realize, well, I'm not getting very far here. How could I get an answer to that question? So you might have to reframe it a couple of times to get back to, to try and get an answer. Clearly, you're never going to have closed questions, because you'll get a closed answer, yes or no. That's not what this process is about at all. But I think as you kind of step into it and start to get the conversation going, even when you have challenging conversations, when someone might feel a bit like they want to get something off their chest about the client, even in those situations, that's not a problem for me, because I'm not the client.
Yeah.
I'm not in that relationship that we were talking about earlier, so if they said to me, oh, Martin, I'm so cracked off with X, Y, and Z. Now, if I owned that account, I'd probably be like, oh, I'm really sorry. I'd have an emotional response to that. Yeah. Because you would, because you care about it. For me, it's like, okay, so why is that exactly? I don't have an emotional response, because my job at this moment in time is not to have an emotional response. My job is to understand why you might feel that way. And I think so those are the kinds of things in the questioning that become really important, because otherwise I could get I could lead that conversation in the wrong direction because I'm like, yeah, that's terrible. They really do that. So I feel awful. I'll pass it on. It's like, that's not, we don't need to go there. And that's a distraction. And especially, like I said earlier, if people start to feel like being heard properly, then actually that really does build some trust as you go. And then you start to pick up on what you hear. And then it really compounds that feeling of, oh, I really am being heard. You know, he's picking up on these things. Also, if you ask questions, people will also say, that's a great question. That's really made me think. And sometimes it helps people think a lot more clearly about the things you're asking them, which can be beneficial for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that is really underestimated in this process, because actually it's not about you necessarily, but it can have another value to the person, which is it's helped share their stuff about the relationship with the client or whatever you're asking them. B, it can also make them think a bit more clearly about the stuff that is in their head, because you're going a bit deeper and you're having pause for thought, and they're able to just keep going with stuff. And actually you realize that a lot of the time people are really busy and they don't have these kind of conversations enough. So the time bit matters. So I think that, and the other thing is, you need to keep going. I think you can't, I'm there to do a job, and it can be quite easy to say, oh, that's a bit of a difficult question. Let's just park that one. But actually, if it is a difficult question, I think it's worth asking, why is that a difficult question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it about that exactly is difficult for you to answer? And that's a completely legitimate line of questioning, because I would like to be able to go, either find the answer in the interview, or at least be able to go back and say, that's quite interesting, that was really that's an area that we couldn't get into. You could hear why that was, and maybe that's something we need to come back to. But, it's really important to not let things go and be listening and picking up. And also, I find that sometimes people want a lot of questions asked in not a lot of time, right? Now, I'm not going to give you some kind of bit of algebra that gives you the ultimate number of questions for a half-hour interview. But what I would say is it can be, you don't need many questions written down. You can write down, let's say, 10 questions, but I might ask 15 questions, because one question leads to another, which is not on the list.
Naturally, yeah.
Like, a lot of it's about clarification. It's like, because people say things and you say, well, what exactly does that mean? Or they might mention a name. I think, the client really needs to be aware of this happening. And you say, well, so who's that then? And what's their relationship? Sometimes that granular information is the gold dust that is needed from the for our clients. It's like, oh, actually, jobs are changing. Someone's moved. They hold their relationship with that person.
It seems a prudent time to ask then after that. And this is what I really wanted to ask you, was what common mistakes do you see that organisations make? I mean, we obviously know what ours were, tiny little mistakes. But what general ones do you see?
I think the first thing is there's a lack of clarity about who the audience is. It's like, who would you talk to and why? That sounds like a fundamental. But if you've got a lot of customers, then you could talk to any of them about for any reason. But what happened? Are you looking at ones that are about to renew contracts? Are you looking at your biggest ones because you need to really deepen the relationship? What is it exactly? You could even talk to people that those that contracts that have just been lost, if you wanted to. It's just like, I think you've got to think really carefully about who you would talk to and why, because that determines quite a lot of things, actually. It determines what the value of the whole process is internally. And therefore, that helps with stakeholder engagement from the outset, which is really important. Because if it's super clear that we're going to be talking to these people, and we want to, what questions would we ask? Because our outcome is, I don't know, to establish, to validate our product roadmap, for example, with our biggest customers. Because right now, Gen AI is blowing it all up, and we just need to really talk to them. For example, that would be probably a sensible thing to do right now. So who would need to be involved internally with that? Because, you might want to do that, but if you didn't talk to the product manager, and yet you're talking about a roadmap with the biggest customers that you've got, the product manager might come back and say, oh, these are great answers, but why didn't we ask them this and this? Yeah. So it's quite easy. It is quite easy. I'm saying this, it sounds so obvious, but it's so easy to sort of get going quite quickly. But actually, it's what's the most valuable use of using someone like us or going through this process. That's the first thing. The other thing about all of this is, in terms of if you have a very limited sample, you've got to be quite careful about how you use that data, and how you analyze what's in front of you, because it takes time. You have different methods of getting data and evidence from people, and some of it can be so we've done, for example, one client, we did a customer satisfaction survey, and then we did the deeper insights based on some of the people, a sample of the satisfaction survey, for example. So, but what you do need to be slightly careful if you're going to interview 3 customers and then ratchet that up and say that is a trend across all our customers. That's going to be slightly a very suspect thing to do. So how you use the insights is really important. And I think the context is really important as well. Just it comes back to how you use them. If you can't just, a lot of this is qualitative data. So it's all about the context. It's not about the numbers. It's actually about, like you said earlier. So why, what makes this a great relationship? What would they like to see from us? You might get some idea of value and impact as well that you can quantify, but ultimately this is, verbatim qualitative feedback that we're talking about. It's rich in information, but it is not a quantitative, data collection exercise. And that's a very different thing.
You said that you've done surveys and these conversations. When do you think one works better than the other? Are there different types of information that people have asked for, and then you think, well, that's probably a survey for that one?
Okay, so it comes back to the purpose. Why? What do you need to know as a business? What's your concern or your excitement or opportunity that you think you need some validation of or evidence to support? I mean, I think that has to be the driving force. Basically, people in organizations are surveyed out, a lot of them. You don't want to waste anyone's time with something. I mean, this is another previous point I didn't mention, is that if you can't demonstrate what's happened as a result of the conversation, then I think that's tricky too, because you've spent the time getting all these great insights out of a customer, and then you need to be able to demonstrate what you're doing with that. And we have had clients where we go back the year later to see what, if anything, has happened as a result of that conversation. Who does that normally? People just employee surveys, or just do that every year. What happens? It's just
what was the outcome?
Anything. So really, the quant stuff is, it's about the purpose. So it's the right tool for the right job. If you need something at scale to give you a sense, to also kind of build a picture, that you can then explore at depth with qualitative means, then I think it can be useful for that. And it can actually help, as I said, identify areas where you might then ask deeper questions. So it can be used in various ways. But I think a lot of the time you still have to have a purpose for it, because otherwise it becomes a set of questions that people are answering and they don't really know why they're doing that. And that's the worst type of approach, I think, because it's all about, you're asking people to engage with you. And if you want them to engage with you, it needs to be quite compelling, and you need to be able to say, well, what will happen as a result of engaging with you? And if that can't be explained, then I think, you need to rethink why you're doing it. So,
and what customer success actually does mean to you as an organisation, I think,
Absolutely. And I think there's a piece that's run throughout this, which is about listening to the answers. And you've talked already about this idea that listening is a superpower. I guess broadening it out beyond the kind of customer insights work that you do, I think organizations are, this is my observation and I own this entirely. This is not the view of my organization at all. I think people are pretty rubbish at listening. I think a lot of people are waiting to speak rather than listening to the answers that somebody's giving. And where I suppose what I'm leading to is, how do we get better at listening? I guess you've talked already about pausing, about giving people space to think and all that. But are there other ways in which all of us could get better at listening, and how that adds value to both the relationship and also the level of information that you gather?
Yeah. Now that's interesting that you're asking me that question, because you are, and I'm talking to you both now. It's like, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, you're expert. Huthwaite is expert at this, and actually it's a kind of persistent issue. It's quite hard. And I think a lot of the time, there are so many factors especially in the workplace, that kind of hinder our ability to do that. And a lot of the time, I think it's just, people always complain about time. I don't know about that, because people make time for the things they want to make time for. So to be able to say we don't have time to listen to people is, I'm not sure about that. But I think role modeling it is really important. Okay, so I'll give you one example. In businesses, meetings, right? In businesses, that would be a crucial forum that should be for people to listen to each other about whatever the reason for that meeting is. And I reckon that 95% of people would say that most meetings, you don't get your voice heard, let alone know what happened as a result of your input. It's not modeled by managers, and it's not, I don't think it's visible enough as being a thing that you do. And because actually there's a lot of discomfort around it sometimes, because it's like I'm just sitting quietly listening to you. Whereas it's almost like everyone needs to, that's kind of a slightly more challenging way to be, or something. And I'm not sure. The other thing I would say about it is interesting, because I do quite a lot of, it's slightly different, slightly tangential, but sort of linked, I do some coaching with the thinking environment, like Nancy Klein's stuff, right? And what's interesting about that is you literally ask a couple of questions, and then you just stop, and then you just all you do is focus on that other person and what they have to say and think about, and then you appreciate them for what's just happened. Some element of it. Now, these are really basic things, but I think a lot of the time, these really simple things around the dynamics of questioning and listening are lost. And I think we have to demonstrate them. And I I think it fits into that thing, the question you asked earlier about just people just being asked questions or in surveys and things or feedback and nothing ever happens. I think people are a bit run ragged from all of that. You just don't, if you don't feel like you're being heard, then you're not going to speak. So I think you have to model it. You can't, how else? If I'm managing you and I'm asking you what you think about something, I need to hear it. And I need to acknowledge that I've heard it. And I think that's another thing, actually, is to actually acknowledge the fact that you're hearing what is being said.
Yeah, it's not enough just to listen, to also show that you have listened very clearly.
Yes.
Echo it back, tell people what you heard, etc.
Well, we have some very well-researched behaviours around that, don't we?
We do indeed. And I think one of the things, just to pick up on one of the things you're talking there about people in meetings not getting good role models, I think one of the issues that we have there is there is a difference between performance and performativity. And sometimes the performative bit of our role is that we are holding court, we are dominating the conversation, we are sharing our pearls of wisdom with everybody, and goodness knows there's enough people have said that's what I do. But so I mean, I take this criticism seriously, and I have heard you people. There's that idea of sometimes the performance is more important if you're not being performative, or the performativity gets in the way of the performance. Sometimes just being quiet, just letting people speak, giving people that space and the time and making the space for them to speak is an essential lesson that people can learn, not just when they're speaking to their clients, but also when they're speaking to their colleagues and their team members, and even sometimes when they're speaking to their managers, to give them the space to actually talk about what it is that's bothering them, rather than defend what they're saying or be defensive in some way. It's really interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, maybe it is a skill that we're just not as good at as we should be. I mean, that's basically, it is, the idea of being heard and having a voice, and, it's just an amazing thing. It really is. And we really do downplay that. And I think you're right about the performative stuff. I mean, because, our kind of digital world is all about performative.
Yeah.
It's everyone's got an opinion. It's all about how you express it. It's about getting it out there all the time.
Yeah.
But it's all one way. It's not listening. That's just telling, like endlessly. And I think the other thing is, why would you do that? Because basically there's a massive impact to doing it. Because I'll give you an example. I was talking about this, like shadow learning in organizations, right? The fact that this is slightly different, but similar, is that people are, doing innovative things every day. They're learning things every day, day in, day out. But the thing is, some of the functional, like HR, learning, talent, that what's going on, and also the senior leadership team in an organisation would like to know some of what's going on, because actually, if it was really good and you could manifest it across the organisation, you might have a really innovative, more successful organisation.
Yeah.
The only problem is that this stuff goes on and no one really knows about it.
Mm.
And why don't they know about it? Because there's probably more of a dynamic of learning and HR rolling in and telling people about what's going on, rather than just going and saying, what is going on?
Mm.
And how does that work? Asking the questions and just listening and building trust with people, because you're the person that comes and just is totally interested in how I'm doing something. That is really powerful. And I think that's the other stuff. It does build a depth of relationship, of credibility. It builds trust in you. Then you become more of a go-to person, because you listen. You don't walk in with solutions. You are listening. And I think that's a part of the skill and that's why it's so important for an organization to do that with their customers, I think, is because actually it's about inquiry. It's about understanding. And these people have the answers to your problems, right? They will tell you what the innovation should look like, and they'll probably pay for it. So why wouldn't you go there? You know, it's that sort of thing. It's like, or what's the most valuable thing in a relationship with your customer? Would you like to know that? Because if you knew it and you did more of it, it'd probably be more valuable to you.
Yeah.
All you have to do is listen, but you have to do that to find out. And I think people don't tend to do it as well as they should do, because the answers generally are in front of people and in the people around them. And that's why you need to do more of it.
Absolutely. I mean, we could talk all day about sort of behaviours and communication behaviours and all of that, but we'll maybe leave that to another podcast, Martin.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Listeners, I think so, yeah.
Thanks very much for that. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for watching or listening to this episode of Mastering Sales and Negotiations. Remember, there'll be other in the series. So wherever you get your podcasts from, via YouTube, via the Huthwaite International website even, you can catch up with any of the past episodes in this series. And also, make sure you don't miss any more by turning on push notifications. And somebody under the age of 50 will now explain that to me in a quiet room. Thank you very much for listening and watching. And remember, if you've enjoyed it, please tell someone else.